Hello internet friends, I'm Ron, and this is Demos in the Dark, and as you know, I am a studio nerd, or at least an aspiring studio nerd, and there is a new pedal out today from Spaceman, and it resembles one of my favorite pieces of rack gear. This here, based on the Pultec EQ, is the Equinox. As I mentioned before, the Equinox is loosely based on the Pultec EQ. At least the control setting is kind of the same, but the thing that makes a Pultec EQ very unique is that you can simultaneously boost and cut frequencies. Spaceman has played around with the values of the EQ itself so that it works a little bit better for guitar specifically. This is still a very subtle effect, but it's one of those subtle effects that can absolutely make a mix. First thing I'm gonna do here is run this down on multiple guitar tracks as well as keys, and my friend Hondo Felder is going to run it down on bass. I will do a quick section on using this for guitar, and then Hondo will come in and show you how to use the Equinox for bass. Let's take a deeper dive into the Equinox from Spaceman. So you take a look at these controls and there's plenty. There are lots of them. So it's not as complex as it looks though. You have a high boost, and then next to that high boost, you pick the frequency that you want to boost. Then we have a cut, and you have the frequency, the high frequency that you want to cut. And then the low cut and low boost share this here frequency selector right there. Then you have a bandwidth control, which basically controls how much Q there is in the mix. It's one of those things that's better heard than explained. So I am running a Heritage Guitars H535 with Righteous Sound pickups in it, and I'm running it into a Silktone amp. Silktone amp sounds like this. After messing around with it for a couple of days, I'm gonna give you 3 examples of how I would use the Equinox. There are plenty more out there, but these are the 3 that I would choose. All right, so this first one is what I call the guitar warmer. So what we did was we cut a little bit off on the 3K, and then we're boosting just a little bit on the 100. So the bass guitar sounds like this. And now, that's cool is you can actually revoice some of your pedals. So I have a Sputnik 3 going here, and it sounds like this. And we can warm that right up. This next one is to really, really punch your way through a mix. So we're not really doing anything with the low here. We have moved the bandwidth down, so it's a very narrow bandwidth. That's going to give us more presence going in. And then what I have done is I am boosting 3K here by quite a bit, but then I am also cutting 3K by a little bit here. So I'll give you an example how that sounds. And again, we can do the same thing with the Sputnik Fuzz. So this one here is just a little bit of a lift specifically for overdriven guitars. And this is, again, this is a solo section. This is something where you really want the focus to be on that distorted guitar. So interestingly enough, we are going to boost the 5K by quite a bit. And then we're going to take 100 on the low, and we are going to both simultaneously boost and cut it. And we're going to move the bandwidth down to the most narrow that it can be so that this is really just pushing forward. I have an Apollo here from Spaceman, and it sounds like this. So you heard it almost seemed more guitar-like. It seemed a bit more woody. You could really just get a lot of that pick attack down. There was just that nice little touch on the top there that really kind of brought everything home. Now, as far as the boosting and cutting of the low frequencies, there's a really cool thing that can happen. So if we take 100 and we both cut and boost it, like we did there, and then we take 3K here, and we both cut and boost that, an interesting thing happens. Let's move this bandwidth a little bit to the middle there too. A really interesting thing happens where there's just this weird meat that happens to your sound. So with the Apollo by itself, it sounds like this. That gives you a little taste of how this thing works with guitar, and you can see why bass players and drummers might like this thing. A kick running through this sounds really good. A bass running through here sounds really good. And I'm not a very good bass player, so I grabbed my friend Hondo Felder to show us how this thing works on bass.
Greetings, I'm Hondo, and this Equinox pedal is pretty special. I've used a lot of EQs in the past couple of years, from like little small form factor stuff to graphic EQs and whatnot, and this might be my favorite and maybe even what I will call the most powerful EQ that I've used, even though it's only got 2 bands. And the reason for that is that it's a Pultec style EQ, and if you're a studio nerd, then you already know what that means. I don't have to explain it. But basically, if you don't know what Pultec style EQs work like, they're shelving EQs, but you'll notice on the low end, for instance, there's a boost and a cut. And those two, the boost and the cut, happen at slightly different frequencies. And what ends up happening is that there's a cut right above where the bass sits, and then you still get a big low shelving EQ. So essentially you can kind of like set a new kind of EQ point for the foundation of your bass tone, which is really, really cool. It works great on the kick drums too. But I don't think there's any other EQ on the market that does this in a pedal form, and I think this thing sounds fantastic. For a couple of sound clips, I used this to thicken up a drive that I thought was kind of thin sounding, and I also used it to get like an instant studio sound with nice high end and smooth lows. And one of the other things that you can do with this is if you cut the lows and the highs and then boost the level up a bit, you get a really round kind of mid-focus type of sound that sounds really nice with flat wound basses. So check these out and let us know what you think. So the other thing that this pedal does that I can't really show you in sound clips is how it kind of changes the feel of the notes under your left hand in particular. It makes each note kind of feel more substantial and gives each note kind of like more weight, for the lack of a better term. And it kind of affects how you pick notes and how much you're playing, and when you play fills and whatnot. And for me, if a pedal kind of contributes to how I'm playing and kind of what type of sound that I'm using, I think that's possibly one of the best reasons for you to get a pedal. So this thing is pretty special, and I definitely recommend you check it out if you're looking for an EQ on bass.
So thank you, Spaceman, for sending this over for me to check out. Thank you, Hondo, for making this thing so much cooler. And thank you to you for your time.